Hey Kev, how's it going?
Hey, doing great. How are you
Good to
doing?
see you. Yeah, very well,
Ano-
thank you.
Another week down.
Another week down.
Another
Uh,
week down.
Very enjoyable part of this book, I thought. Really good again to get refamiliarized with a lot of it. So again, we're having sort of different models of the relationship between Rome and the Way, or the early Christian movement, or whatever. So there was a difficulty figuring out how this relationship should look, how it was going to play out, how much of the threat to Rome the Way caused, and in what ways it was possible to completely be in unison, to be a Roman and a Christian and a follower of Jesus at the same time. And so the first one we said was just totally mutually exclusive. That's John of Patmos in the Book of Revelations. He was looking forward to the overthrow of Babylon, which was, of course, code for Rome, and looking forward to a total restoration of the political kingdom of Israel and this reign of righteousness of a Davidic king, messianic figure on the throne for him, Jesus. And Rome was done. So that's one version. Now we're on to the second one, which is Luke and Acts version, which is there is some kind of accommodation between the two, so that we are not a threat to you. And so he's got a real interesting task to do here. He's got to differentiate the Way, the Christian movement, from the sort of like messianic Jewish movement that's been causing a lot of problems in Jerusalem. And so he's got
Yeah.
to say that we are from them. We're kind of like Jewish, also a part of Judaism, but we're like the true Judaism. One of the great points that John Dominick Crossan makes is like, he's not claiming that we're a harmless sect of Judaism. He's saying like we are the true fulfillment of Judaism. We are not a sect at all. It's kind of like when I was thinking about this, when sometimes you'll hear Christians say, "I'm just a Christian. I don't have a denomination at all." Or when you hear like somebody say like, "Are you Catholic or are you Christian?" as if as if those two are different things or whatever. But that's kind of what he's trying to do. He's trying to say like, I and the people I'm representing here are the God-fearing folks, because this is the perspective that he's writing from. We are the people who used to be kind of sitting on the outside. Now we're fully integrated and on the inside, and we are not a threat to you. We are, good Roman citizens. And so render unto Caesar. Where does that stand here? Yes, pay your
Yeah.
taxes. Obviously, was a big controversy at the time whether or not these taxes should be paid, and he's letting good Theophilus, or I'm saying his name wrong. Whatever his name was, it means God lover, fear of
Yeah.
God, or whatever. He So it just says Theos in the name, and the Philos, or Philos, which means like love, God lover, or
Mhm.
something like that. And he's writing and to let Rome know that we are, going to be good people. We're not a threat or anything like that. The problem.
Yeah, and this part is called Culture Accepted and Canonized. And the first chapter is entitled Creating a Counter Narrative. In chapter 6, Creating a Counter Narrative, the author explains how Luke Acts was written as a forward looking, unified project designed to challenge Rome's view of Christianity as a dangerous superstition. To protect believers, Luke crafts a story showing that Christianity is completely safe to practice within the Roman Empire. He highlights this by drawing a parallel between Jesus and Paul, showing that both were officially declared innocent by three different levels of Roman authority by portraying Roman officials as fair, legal, and impartial, while depicting the Jews as the true villains causing riots. Luke creates a persuasive pro Christian counter narrative to reassure his readers that they can be both loyal Roman subjects, and faithful Christians.
Yeah, a lot of problems in with revolutionaries in Jerusalem had kind of developed a reputation, and a lot of different sort of actions going on there in Jerusalem. So it's important, for whoever the historical Luke was, to show that, hey, this guy Jesus is totally cool with Rome or whatever, which is sort of funny,
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah. And I think when you say God-fear, that means it's a Gentile who attends synagogues or at least somehow participates in that community.
Yeah.
So they aren't Israel. They aren't Jewish.
That's right. And
So
so they're not looking to
yeah,
restore Israel or anything like that. They're not a part of that group, is part of what they're trying to say.
yeah, yeah.
I
So they're
guess we should
trying
say a
to.
little bit more about God-fearers, perhaps. But so like there were people who were attracted to Judaism for various reasons. John Dominick Crossan points out a few. He said, so these would be, the nations or the Gentiles or the Goyim or however you want to talk about these people. People in the ancient Near East who saw Jews, especially Jews out in the diaspora, but also in places more traditionally associated with Judaism, but who saw these folks and kind of admired certain parts of their culture. Stuff that you see even now with the way in which people admire a Jewish community. So they admire them for the way they look after each other. They take care of each other. They have a community. When for your normal pagan person in the ancient Near East at this time, first century, there was not a lot of security or family or community, people moving out of these rural areas. Tight knit, educated community as, something that, interested them. And also just having this, kind of philosophical backing to their theology. So already had been, Hellenized so much that they were able to incorporate a lot of the concepts of Greek philosophy in particular. And so it just there was a lot to admire and be attracted to by the God-fearers, but they didn't have full participation until the advent of Jesus and the way and his followers, in which it didn't matter. And this is one of the big things that comes up over and over again. There's a lot of argument, and we'll get into some more of this soon, but about like what you needed to be a part of this movement. There were apparently some who did think you needed circumcision and that kind of thing still, but it seems that the majority opinion was that you didn't need circumcision. Now, there a lot of the argumentation came around like, are you then still allowed to like, you know, have this relationship with Rome where you see, the emperor as God and this kind of stuff, and where you maybe even sacrifice to, what are considered idols and stuff like this. And so, yeah, we're going to see a number of instances where certain folks, Paul famously portrayed as sort of disrupting Roman commerce when he tells people to, stop worshiping idols. Well, that has a real negative effect on Roman citizens who are selling idols to people and
Ec-
running the pagan temples. So
Economically, yeah.
yeah, so this
Hey,
is a threat. Yeah,
I know Timothy was circumcised and he was a God-fearer, without any anesthetic, right? uh, but Titus was not.
right.
So, anyways, it's just I'd rather be Titus, I guess, in that situation.
Yeah, it's
Um,
interesting
but
too. I
yeah,
would love to know how like circumcision like just became the norm, even though it was decided that it wasn't necessary.
yeah,
So like it's just amazing to me.
yeah.
So John Dominic Crossan makes the point that the God-fearers like were almost already foretold by a lot of Jewish thinkers, including in the book of Daniel, to where these are going to be people who are the nations, the people outside of Israel are going to become a part of Israel, grafted in. But they don't have to. They don't have to have that mark of the covenant. Although they're going to, still kind of like, to some extent, be bound by, Jewish law and stuff like that. But that specific Jewish like mark of circumcision, which
Mm,
caused so much controversy, was not necessary for them to be full participants in this movement of the way.
uh, especially in the Book of Acts, just that broadening of the gospel, where it began with a small Jewish sect, and then it progressively and gradually moved towards God-fearers and Samaritans and even barbarians, um, and ended up in Rome. Yeah, so it's you see that in Acts. I can remember when I did an internship after college in Texas. The Bible teacher that I was under, he had us like map out the Book of Acts, geographically and the whatever. Just it was kind of a neat book to read through because you kind of see that some sort of progression, um, which Crossan talks about. I think maybe in the next chapter, in chapter 7, whom Paul had taken with him. The author explains that while the writer of Luke Acts is never explicitly named, the text relies on four we us sections that seem to come from a detailed travel diary. However, even though the author knows a lot about Paul, his views often conflict with Paul's actual
Yeah.
letters, showing that he modified his sources to fit his own perspective.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, a unique feature of Luke Acts is its heavy focus on God-fearers, Gentile supporters of the synagogue, suggesting that the author himself was likely a former God-fearer who addressed his work to Theophilus, which could mean an individual or a broader group of God lovers. Ultimately, the author writes from a unique perspective as a Gentile who understands Roman culture, but also as someone with deep experience inside Jewish communities.
Yeah, so he really goes into how the God-fearers, would have already had some familiarity. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been such a community kind of like made ready for the way, for the message or
Yeah,
whatever. They really knew a lot of the reference points that were being made because they had studied it or they had listened to it at the synagogue or whatever. And so that, when somebody comes along with a different interpretation of what's going on, they already know what's being interpreted. They already know the text, the concepts, the ideas that are being interpreted, so they can come into that community and then really form the foundation of that community in some kind of ways. Although, Jewish Christians, those who had been, full practicing Jews were, really the first Christians or followers of Jesus because those were his apostles and, the community in Jerusalem and stuff like that. The biggest kind of push for the early Christian movement came from people who were converted in, as members who had priorly been of the God-fearers or whatever,
yeah,
because they were ready for it. And I mean, the other thing to keep in mind here is about how Luke and Acts portrayal of Paul is so well. Acts portrayal of Paul. So I guess I should mention just for the listeners' reference that the first part of Acts. Oh, I should even mention this. Luke wrote, whoever he was, wrote probably two books as 2 volumes, like, but it was meant to be, one thing. So, and he's the only gospel writer that did that. So before, and then after the death and resurrection of Jesus. So Luke, the gospel according to Luke, is a gospel about Jesus, and then Acts is split into two. And so you're going to have the first part of Acts is going to be mostly about Simon Peter and what is going on with the community of Jerusalem. And then the second part is going to be Paul, mostly about Paul. A lot of what is said about Paul conflicts with what Paul said about Paul, which is why John Dominick Crossan kind of separates out two Pauls, the Luke's version of Paul and Paul's version of Paul.
yeah. And then I thought this was interesting. Then he separated out uh, Paul's letters for sure,
Yeah.
Paul's letters maybe not,
Yeah.
and Paul's letters definitely not.
Definitely not. Yeah.
I
Which he
thought,
called pseudo
yeah,
Paul. Yeah.
yeah, I thought that was interesting. But in chapter 8, the vision of Roman Christianity, author argues that Luke Acts was carefully crafted to protect early Christians' reputation by portraying it as a peaceful, law-abiding movement that poses no threat to the Roman Empire. To achieve this, the text highlights four main themes. Christian leaders are unified and orderly. Public riots are caused by greedy Gentiles. Local hostility stems from jealous Jewish opponents, and Christians are entirely innocent of violating Roman law. To
Hmm.
prevent any perception of internal power struggles, Luke Acts keeps Paul subordinate to the original 12 apostles in James, noting that Paul only heard Christ rather than seeing him, while framing Christianity as an ancient tradition distinct from Judaism so it wouldn't draw Rome's suspicion. Ultimately, by showing both Jesus at the end of Luke and Paul at the end of Acts being repeatedly cleared of all charges by military officers, client kings, and governors, the text firmly establishes that Christians were repeatedly judged innocent under Roman law.
Right. And so the threat that Luke's got to figure out how to portray in a sort of benign or at least benign or innocuous way is let's just start with Paul. So it seems like and James and probably Simon Peter in the community of Jerusalem, there was a clear conflict, and Paul also has
Yeah,
incentive to try to like downplay it a bit, but like the conflict seems to be where and what Paul is confronted about is like, hey, we hear you're telling, people that they don't need to worry about the law, that they don't need to, and then, Paul backs up and he's like, no, I'm not saying that. So like he can't, the author of Luke and Acts cannot portray this conflict as bad as it probably was. I would
yeah,
imagine that people saw it as a split, even. I don't know. And so he's got to make it seem like there was a reconciliation. Paul also makes it seem like there was a reconciliation, in his letters, so that, when him and James have their conversation, it's like, all right, so yeah, well, we still won't like, eat meat sacrificed to idols or whatever. And we still won't, do these certain, unclean things, but we're going to totally relax the rule on circumcision. And this is the thing that, in Paul's letters, he rails the most against, where he tells people they should cut their whole unit off
yeah,
because,
yeah,
of their emphasis on circumcision. And then we have this really wild scene in Acts where Peter is shown all these unclean animals, non-kosher animals, and told to eat them,
yeah,
by Jesus. And so
yeah,
there's like this weird sort of resolution there. But again, even Paul has this kind of like weird stance on it. He's like, well, it's a compromise stance because he has to have a compromise of some kind. Writing to the community of Jerusalem, he's saying to them, hey, don't, eat these non-kosher things if it scandalizes your brothers and sisters. Like, you just, you don't want to like cause them to stumble. So, just be cool about it. You can like eat those things, but don't eat them
yeah,
in like in front of them or whatever. Same with like meat sacrificed to idols. Like we know those idols are total like nothing anyways. I mean, this is one of
yeah,
Paul's big ministry. Like these things are meaningless little trinkets, like toys. They don't contain gods or anything like that. And so like that's fine if you eat meat sacrificed to idols, but if it scandalizes one of your Jewish Christian brothers or whatever, don't do it in front of them or whatever. And then James is like, we heard you were saying this to these people and all this other
yeah,
kind of stuff. And it just becomes this thing that Luke has to try to figure out how to smooth out and smooth over, and they have this
yeah,
really, I've never understood it since reading it, what was going on with this, but two different portrayals of how Paul tries to make amends, perhaps make amends with the community in Jerusalem. So one is he takes up a collection for the poor, which would be the Ebionites, that community there. And giving to them, which John Dominick Crossan points out, shows that community was still like waiting for the end because they weren't getting jobs. They were like,
Mm.
they were already, they were sitting there waiting for an imminent return. So they were, they weren't, not a lot of them were not from Jerusalem. They didn't have people in Jerusalem, they didn't have jobs in Jerusalem. They had left their work, they had left their, families and whatever else to be a part of this community. And so, Paul is supposedly, depending on which portrayal you look at it, in Acts for sure, it was an act of reconciliation. He brings this down there like, we're cool now because I'm giving you this money that I took up a collection for or whatever.
Hmm.
And then him and James came to some kind of a compromise or whatever. But there's also a lot of evidence, historical evidence, that they never really did come to a very solid compromise. And but he wants to, and then so they want to. James and Peter are always like, okay, well, you never even really met Jesus. And then Paul is always having to be like, I was given this vision and Jesus taught me, and I'm telling you what I had in my, you know, experience of the risen
Yeah.
Lord or whatever. So it has authority, over you. And you guys are bound to like stop, preaching circumcision and stop preaching, kosher laws and that kind of stuff. So it's a
Hmm.
kind of a
Hmm.
confusing mix, and so Luke really has his work cut out for him, so to speak, to try to make this. And John Dominick Crossan says, he's got to try to make it seem like there's not a lot of arguments. There's like this unified theology, so it's not just like this bickering, community or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like it reminds me of political parties when there's infighting,
Hmm. Hmm.
where there's some conflict, but someone always comes out and says, "Oh no, there's no conflict. It's fine." We try to smooth it over, like we're all unified. But I don't think any large group or even a small group of people are ever truly unified. You know,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
yeah. How Crossan was saying in Luke Acts that Paul like downplayed his apostleship, in a
Mm,
way, and his authority, and how he was submissive to the
that's
church in
right.
Jerusalem.
Which is the opposite of the
Um,
letters, Paul's
but
letters.
then when
Yeah.
when Paul was quite bold, he even confronted Peter
Hmm.
at one time, for I think not eating with Gentiles or something. I'm trying to think what
Yeah.
letter
Yeah.
that's
That's
in.
it. Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wouldn't eat with Gentiles, and he was like, I confronted Peter, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Peter's like the according to some other gospels, Peter was the second man in charge, so to
Yeah.
speak.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yet then James came along, which I guess was the brother of Jesus.
That's
That's
the
what I was
speculation.
taught.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
whoever it was, but he had some peculiar leadership. Like he seemed like to be the head of
Hmm.
of um,
Yep.
everybody. But then Peter stood up after Pentecost as kind of being the leader of the 12, or well, I guess you include Matthias, right? Or leader, um, he acted as if he was the leader. So kind of interesting. I don't know if there's one clear person.
Because as totally opposed to Acts, Paul was constantly talking about
Right.
himself as Jesus, gave me authority to like
Yeah.
tell you guys what's up because he taught me
Right.
directly. And
Oh
so,
yeah,
but,
he did.
but that's totally
Yeah.
cut out of Luke and Acts. So, like,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Chapter
100.
9 argues that Luke Acts is driven by two main themes: geographical journeys and the power of the Holy Spirit, to map Christians' transformation from a Jewish movement in Jerusalem to a global religion centered in Rome. The narrative follows a deliberate geographic arc, shifting from a southward journey in Luke, Galilee to Jerusalem, to a westward expansion in Acts, Jerusalem to Rome, with the Holy Spirit intervening at key moments to direct the spread and liberate the oppressed. To present a unified front, Luke portrays Paul as innocent during his travels while framing Roman officials as fair protectors and non-believing Jewish leaders as a source of conflict. Ultimately, by establishing Rome as a new holy city, Luke acts correctly foresees the future of the faith not as a Jewish Christianity, but as a Roman Christianity.
The problem, I guess, that's in a lot of the Gospels. also, in Paul's epistles as well, as a sort of anti-Jewish idea. So do
Yeah.
you wind up getting this scapegoating? Actually, it's good to scapegoat this particularly, you know, troublemaking, radical, Jewish community that aren't really following, the way, and like being recalcitrant, and they're the problem. So you gotta show Rome that you're not the problem. So
Yeah.
that somebody else is the problem. And so
Yeah.
one of the things that get emphasized whenever Paul comes up, he likes to emphasize both his Pharisaic background but also his Roman citizenship. And so
Yeah.
in Acts they really go and emphasize this is a citizen of Rome who was tried by Roman authorities and found innocent. And that's what you get as a portrayal in the Gospels. So in this case, we're talking about Luke and Acts, is that Jesus was tried in front of Roman authorities and they dismissed it. And so they try to put all of it on Caiaphas and the, Jewish authorities in Jerusalem.
Right.
Rather, and
Right.
so that you can see how anti-Semitism is always this curious question that always comes up, like these people were all Jews. How are they,
Yeah.
like anti-Semitic? How can that even be possible? And but like so, but the thing is like they wanted to show that they were um, the true Jews, the true fulfillment of their Hebrew identity, so that they were the way. Not and those other ones were the sectarians that rejected Jesus or whatever. It's like this little game, like I was saying, in the beginning, this little sectarian game. Like we're the real
Yeah.
Christians. They're the ones who are schismatic or whatever. They're the one breaking
Yeah.
from the true message. They're the danger or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I just remember that John F. Kennedy, like he was the first Catholic president elected,
yeah,
and what I understand through history and what my dad said is is people were worried that he would be influenced by the Pope
yeah, yeah.
too
Very
much,
worried.
and so there was that kind of downplaying of like I could be president of the United States
Exactly.
and represent the
Yeah,
citizens,
yeah,
but I'm not tied to the Pope in some. I mean, I am, but I'm not. Like I could be
yeah.
both.
That's
And I
right.
feel
Yeah,
like it's very kind of similar to I think what Luke is trying to present. Like you can be, you know, a God-fearer, you can be a Christian, but a Roman at the same time.
right.
Yeah, and it's always a, and we always deal with that. Like you kind of see this, in I think in a lot of churches, like you meet people and they're very anti-government, anti-establishment, almost like not quite as extreme, but like very much like the revelation of John, like
Book of Revelations. Yeah,
they're
right.
evil. The government's all these
Yeah,
conspiracy,
right.
the swamp. They're
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
all that stuff. And then where most people, I think, are just like, yeah, the government has its issues, and our politicians may, you know, be too influenced by special interests, but they're kind of in between. Like,
Yeah,
they kind of
yeah.
see
It's
the
it's it's a
benefit, and it's not the end of the world, kind of
right.
thing.
Yeah, it's full
So,
of, well, yeah, more the center position where, yeah,
right,
it's full of people. We definitely need to keep a watch on them, under scrutiny, whatever.
right,
But like because of corruption. But
yeah,
it's not like, yeah. I mean, in many ways, Book of Revelations is a conspiracy theory. It's like this
yeah,
conspiracy of evil, that needs to be totally extirpated and thrown over.
yeah,
So, well, it's
um,
always kind of been, we are the country, that basically is characterized by conspiracy. So, it's always been a part of our
yeah,
country. It's part of the reason why Book of Revelations has always been so popular here. Well, I
yeah.
guess really became popular in the mid 19th century with that Irish Darby Methodist preacher guy. I can't remember his first name right now, but anyway,
John Darby, I think
yeah,
John Nelson
right.
Darby.
John
Yes,
Nelson Darby, good job.
yes,
Yeah, he was the first one to really get us going with the a Book of Revelation, all that kind of conspiracy stuff. But it's in many ways goes all the way back to the Revolution, and we kind of needed to drum up a conspiracy that England
yeah,
was So it's always been a part of our
Right.
milieu, our culture.
Yeah.
Even you could say they call American politics the paranoid style of
Yeah.
politics. So
Yeah. I
there's
could
this
see
just
that.
constant like thinking there's some evil machinations going on underneath, some ruling elites of
Yeah.
some kind and their
Right.
whatever sex rings and
Skull
all
and
the rest of the
it's
kind of
called
stuff,
Skull and Bones. Skull and
ball and
Bones, right?
bones and all that. Yeah,
All that
Masons or
crazy.
whoever.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. It's
So
fun. Yeah, it's fun to think about and watch movies about it, but you need to recognize it for what it is. It's kind of our desire to put things in order that when you're experiencing chaos, you want like
well,
an
have something to
answer,
name it with, right? Yeah,
name it like this person is at fault. This is why this is the way it
right.
is. And a lot of times there's just no answer. Like some,
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah.
no clear answer, no clear causation of things
Yes.
like that. So yeah. So chapter 10, which is titled, what's the title? The Cost of Acculturation. So chapter 10 argues that early Christianity compromised its original radical vision in order to fit into the Roman Empire, shifting from a demand for systemic justice to a preference for personal charity. The historical Paul viewed baptism as a subversive rejection of Aristotle's traditional hierarchies, breaking down barriers between Jew and Gentile, slave and free, and male and female to create absolute equality. However, the author of Luke Acts de radicalizes Paul's
Mhm.
message to make it acceptable to Rome. Instead of dismantling slavery, Luke promotes giving money to the poor. And instead of allowing women to hold equal leadership roles, he reduces their role to submissive listening and service. Ultimately, while Luke requires Rome to accept Jesus over Caesar as a divine authority, Christianity pays a heavy price for the acceptance of abandoning Paul's fight for structural justice and settling for individual charity instead.
Paul's vision of radical equality, when he talks about, neither man nor woman, neither slave nor free, neither Jew nor Gentile, all that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
could be seen as a threat to Rome. So how do you kind of like make that a little less sharp? So Luke, very famously, like when he says like, what you in terms of like the poor, it's more like instead of this shift to like we need to just have this totally different form of government in which there isn't poor. That is not
yeah,
where he's going to go with that. He
yeah,
had to go to a idea of like charity, as you said, like give to the
yeah,
poor, give alms to the poor, or whatever. So like it's not going to be neither slave nor free, neither rich nor poor, or whatever. It's going to be we're going to still have poor, but we're going to we have some obligation to them to give to them or whatever. And we're coming up to like his exempla gratis, which is going to be Cornelius, who's like Roman citizen, follower of the way, or whatever you want to call it at this point. Roman citizen, Christian par excellence, who is going to exemplify that this is totally compatible, and we're not like a bunch of hippie radicals or whatever. And you can imagine he's having to like sort of like do something to assuage fears because this whole letter is a response to like um things that are being said about Christians, some of them probably true, some of them not true, but like people trying to demonize Christians basically. You always make your foe a demon one way or another. This is the whole point of the scapegoat mechanism. And so he's trying to now counteract that. That's why this is called a counter narrative. It is countering the narratives that are out there about them right now so
mhm,
that he can clear up some things. And there's a lot of sharpness to Jesus's message. So you've got to
yeah.
really try to figure out how to chill it out a little bit so that you're
And I
not
feel,
like
yeah,
threatening Rome so much.
and I feel like today, I mean, if you're to go before certain churches, and if you were to say, hey, let's give money to this or that, let's support this ministry, that more charitable things, which are great. It would be accepted. Oh, that's great. But man, if you were talk about like reparations, like or something like that, or
Or entitlement programs like that, like distribute
yeah,
wealth or whatever. It's like
right.
now you're a commie, you
Oh,
know.
you're
Like, so,
woke.
yeah,
You're a
yeah,
communist.
that's why this is why for so
Yeah,
many churches, social justice is like an evil term now, and all this kind of stuff, which is
yeah,
shocking. But yeah, so this has not been resolved.
yeah. And I don't know if I shared this with you, but at the Columbus Mennonite Church, they support an organization that, well, here's what this organization is based on. There was a slave owner in Virginia, and in his will, he was going to free his slaves when he died, and they were to be given land in Ohio. And so the man dies, slaves are freed, the slaves, migrated up north, west, you know, and to Ohio to claim their land that was legally and rightfully theirs. Well, it turns out people that were living there and living close to that area did not like that,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
and basically said you can't have this land.
Hmm.
And they were just kind of pushed to kind of least desirable places and professions, and it's just a group that I think in concordance with the Ohio Historical Society, but just even just acknowledging that and promoting like a an organization like that would be offensive to a lot of churches, like
Oh, for sure.
redistribution, or I guess we call it redistribution, or restitution. Is it restitution? I think that you kind of give back their land that they lost or that
Hmm.
was rightfully theirs.
Allegiance. You have to show that your first allegiance is in some sense to Rome. That if if you come into conflict with the values of Rome, that which obviously neither slave nor free in your example of freed slaves would happen. So Paul famously returns a slave. Paul has to, write to Philemon to return the slave Onesimus, and to basically remind Philemon that his obligation as a Christian is to release his slave. So that he's trying to do this. It's just this really interesting thing of this interaction between Roman law, which of course allows and protects slavery, and the new law given by Jesus, that there is no slavery, and so he's got to figure out how to do this. So he follows the Roman law by putting, sending the slave back, because that's, what you're supposed to do. But then he has to remind Philemon that Onesimus needs to be freed, because that's not something that, we're allowed to do anymore.
Hmm.
And of course, so famously, there were so many Christian slaveholders, and so they had to somehow find a way to do this, even though it seemed like at least certain parts of the Bible, made it clear that this was not to be done. And but then you have more accommodationalist perspectives, like slaves obey your master.
Yeah.
So in Ephesians and Colossians, Paul actually writes, slaves obey your master. But of course, there's a dispute as to whether this is Paul or whether this is pseudo Paul, or, or
Yeah.
what this is. But you can imagine, as Luke Timothy Johnson does, that Paul's letters are occasional in the sense that he's aware of the audience that he's writing to, and so he also had to straddle this line between, like, Rome and uh, teachings of Jesus and of the way, so that he has to, like, he cannot come across as radical, like, everyone free your slave right now, even though that's what he
Right.
tells Philemon to do with Onesimus.
In summary, those post, pseudo, and anti Pauline letters negated Paul's baptismal commitment to distributive justice, and Luke consummated that by denying Paul's apostolic identity authority, and integrity. Such was the cost of acculturation in Roman Christianity, the price of preparation for Constantine, and the ongoing Christ compromise that demands heaven for Christ but concedes earth to Caesar. When he talks about Mark's gospel, he said, when we look at the entire demonology in Mark's gospel, we can see the difference between justice and charity, the difference between a single systemic or structural root cause and manifold effects, results, and consequences. Charity for demoniacs is certainly good and charitable. Healing is surely kind, but the only solution is the replacement of the injustice of Rome's rule by the justice of God's rule. Charity is not justice, and salving injustice is not solving injustice. In the biblical tradition, distributive justice should be the norm. Adequate alms should be for emergencies, and distributive alms should never replace distributive justice or enable distributive injustice. Ched Meyer's commentary on the Gospel of Mark, Binding the Strong Man, reframes Jesus' life and ministry as a movement for social justice and nonviolent political resistance, rather than just a quick religious story. Writing through the lens of liberation theology, Myers argues that Mark was composed during the Jewish-Roman War, a time when ordinary people were squeezed between the heavy taxes of the Roman Empire and the greed of the wealthy Jerusalem temple leaders. In this harsh setting, Jesus' actions were deeply subversive. His exorcisms and miracles challenged oppressive political systems. His teachings on Sabbath economics called for sharing resources with the poor, and his famous protest at the temple was a direct attack on a corporate financial system that preyed on widows and the needy. Ultimately, Myers showed that taking up the cross meant risking execution to stand against systemic injustice, challenging readers to practice an active, courageous faith that resists oppression in their own communities.
Demons. It's amazing that demonology has had such a resurgence in our present culture, and it is like this scapegoating mechanism of just putting like you hear this kind of thing now, like, oh, we got so much. Why do we have so much demon possessions right now? It's because we got homosexuality, and we got like all this crazy crap that gets talked about in terms of like demon possession now. And so Crossan has a totally different idea. He said, it had to do with the injustices that were being committed. He said, Crossan asked the question, why were there so many demon possessions in
Yeah,
at
in
this
Mark.
time? Yeah, in Mark, and just I mean, it's just they're in other gospels too. It's just like,
Yeah,
but there's other multiple attestations to like the phenomenon of demon possessions. Not saying that they were actual demon possessions or not, just saying that a lot of people said, that there were all these demon possessions or whatever, including in,
yeah,
reports from Josephus and other, historians at the time. So, anyways, why? So Crossan's like, well, why was this? And it's exactly because of that. Just as it was stated in that quote you read, that there was all this kind of oppression and injustice going on. And Crossan particularly points to something that's been totally depoliticized again, but like when the demoniac who's I've heard he's called like a hyper demoniac or something, like a super demon possession of some kind or another. And he's got super strength apparently as well. And when Jesus asked him, like, who are you or whatever, and it says the name is Legion.
I'm
Well,
Legion.
it's real clear he's talking about Roman legions here. So this is the literalism of this is one thing, but like when you start reading this like metaphorically, what is this supposed to mean? Well, this seems to have something to do with possession by Rome and by Roman values, and this is what needs to be cast out. So that you got this real, this real hidden kind of
Yeah,
analogy or
and
metaphor
even
going on here.
with the idea of like behind these unjust institutions, kind of not that they're demons, but like it was a metaphor, and Christ was casting them out,
That's
kind of
right.
bringing justice, I guess, and casting out the injustice of these
Yeah, into
institutions.
these unclean
Yeah,
animals that then run themselves
right.
over the cliff. So yeah,
Which hurt
so
them
for
economically. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah,
I'm
which
sorry.
brings us to John Dominick Crossan's point about this economic, seeing, certain types of economic threats from, the Jewish community, but also from the, Jewish Christian community or the followers of the way or whatever. And so one of them is, like, well, yeah, not eating pigs, refusing pork, that kind of stuff could be economically not viable. I mean, it's clear that if Paul hadn't have made eating pork okay, like the conversion of Rome and Europe would have never happened because
Mhm,
like they were
mhm.
so dependent on pigs in Europe and
Yeah.
throughout the Mediterranean. It was just such a economic problem. If you just decided not to eat pigs, there would have been a big issue. The other big threats were, of course, Paul saying that the idols were useless and worthless, and so don't need to buy those, and so idol manufacturers were pissed about that. And the last one also has to do with Paul, and it has to do with demons, and it's this great kind of, it's almost a funny story, but like I think Paul cast out a demon from a woman, and she had been using the demon to see people's futures and stuff like that. And so then, and she was a slave woman, and so like all of a sudden this like destroyed her master's livelihood. Now she couldn't,
Mhm,
make her master money anymore by predicting people's future because she didn't have the daemon in her anymore, or the demon in
mhm,
her anymore, or
mhm,
whatever.
mhm.
So like you can really see that like this, when you see the casting out of demons, you should see it as maybe it's real, I don't know, but like at least you should also see it on the metaphorical level as having to do with the economic threat of this kind of religiosity, these religious movements and stuff like that
Yeah.
to
In the
Rome. When
Bible.
when Jesus did
Yeah.
miracles, when he cast out demons, they all had maybe whatever literal sense,
Yeah.
if you're a literalist, but they also had a metaphorical meaning too. They were
Yeah.
teachings.
Yeah.
They were to promote a
Right.
certain way of seeing the world,
And
of being in
especially
the
from the
world.
author. Especially the
Yeah.
author was trying to teach something.
That's right.
So
Exactly right.
that's
Yes.
a
Yeah.
big
And that's
thing.
that's always what I mean when I say
Yeah.
that, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
No. No. That's
Jesus,
good.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes I slip into just talking about Jesus, but yes, I mean the Jesus portrayed by the author. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
which makes sense because they each author has some sort of agenda. Not
that's right. Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
bad thing. It's just an agenda trying to
Yeah.
communicate, just
Yep.
like we all do when we, talk to people and make speeches or whatever. We
Right.
have
Right.
kind
Right.
of agenda. I think
That's
that's
it.
it.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Well, another good session.
Yeah.
I don't know if is the next one the last one then, the Josephus section,
Yeah.
nonviolent
Yeah.
resistance, and we'll put it all together.
Yeah. Part 3.